Welcome to the Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Hello, everybody. This is Melissa Chareau. I'm your host of the Fully Mindful podcast, where we explore mindful living and purposeful journeys. Today, we are honored to have Liz Farmer, founder and executive director of Portland New Family Fund, on the show. Liz is a second-generation Jewish American anthropologist, activist, birth worker, and she's dedicated to empowering families and building strong communities. She founded this remarkable nonprofit with a mission to provide financial assistance for birth and postpartum doulas, along with newborn lactation, feeding services, ensuring equitable compensation to birth professionals. So I hope you'll join us today as we delve into Liz's vision for the future, where all new parents have the support that they need to thrive physically, emotionally, and mentally. Welcome, Liz.
Hello.
It's great to have you here. And just for the listeners, I'm pretty excited because Liz and I have now known each other, I don't know, maybe a little like a year and a half, I'm guessing. And I've gotten to witness some of the incredible growth as well as the mission and how that's bearing out of Portland New Family Fund. And I'm pretty excited to have you on the show. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I guess maybe so folks could get a sense of how this all came about. Maybe you could share the story of how you initially became involved in birth work in general and doula services and what inspired you to pursue this path.
Yeah, I've been working in the maternal health sphere for about 13 years now. And I was looking for something to do my master's thesis on. And I've always really been interested in women's issues and women's experience in society. And so I decided to do my thesis on the medicalization of birth in the US. And just from doing that research and learning that the United States has the worst maternal health outcomes in the developed world. So we have the most moms and babies that die and get injured and sick during the perinatal year. So the year where people are pregnant, give birth, and are postpartum have just the worst outcomes. And that's largely due to our healthcare system being extremely flawed. But as I learned about that from this academic perspective, I became really interested in seeing what it was out in the field. And so I learned what a birth doula was. And a birth doula, it's a term that was coined in the 80s and by researchers who looked at labor assistance, which were basically women in the community going to the births of women. And birth doulas help people figure out prenatally what they want for their birth. So what options they have, what type of childbirth education they want to do. And then the birth doula will attend the birth and help folks get comfortable during their birth. They'll do massage, they'll do position changes for comfort. They'll help them figure out when to go to the hospital if they're birthing in a hospital. And then they'll also help them advocate for what they want during their birth and also advocate for a safer birth, because part of the reason we have such bad outcomes in the US is because we use way too many interventions. So we use a lot of medications during birth to speed birth up so that it's faster. And That's sometimes necessary for health and safety, but what has happened is that our medical system has used it to make births happen when they want it to fit the system. And so because we're so interventive during birth, you get all the risk factors that come from those medications and procedures. So the birth doula can help clients stave off some of the things that the medical staff is trying to do to hurry their birth along.
Right. And I think a lot of people hopefully are familiar with what a midwife is, and a doula's role is really different than that of the midwife for
Yeah.
that reason, right? They're really
And
there. I'm sorry, go ahead.
so the midwife is like the OB, like the
Mhm.
obstetrician. So they are the medical care providers, and doulas are non-medical.
And so even if somebody has a midwife, which tend to be, I think, maybe less intervention happy, then you still may need a doula because you may need somebody to advocate for you and what is best for you and what is going to make you most comfortable and have the experience that is best suited for you and your needs, whether those are medical needs, emotional needs, physical needs, right?
Right, exactly. And there have been multiple studies on birth doulas, and the studies have shown across the board that birth doulas lower your risk of a C-section, which is a surgical birth, by 50%. They reduce your risk of your baby having to go to the NICU. They improve just general health and well-being during your birth because you have a constant presence with you. And that in and of itself is relaxing to have
Right.
someone there who's just for you, supporting you. Our nervous system is able to put its guard down.
Yeah, because I mean, for any woman, especially in the hospital situation, but for any birth situation, there's a lot to be nervous about, right? So even if you're birthing at home, there are risks there that you might be worried about, that it is really important to have a doula there if possible. And for sure in a hospital to have somebody be advocating on behalf of the mother's needs or the parent's needs. And it just seems to me like a lot of people might go, well, that all sounds really great, but isn't this kind of a little bit of a luxury?
Mhm.
And so, what are your thoughts on that?
Historically in the US, it has been a luxury where wealthy, mostly white women could afford to pay for doula care because birth doulas can cost anywhere between, $500 and $3,000. That's typical across the United States, depending on where you are. And then postpartum doula care, which is a separate job where they come to your home and they help with feeding and the emotional piece of postpartum and do some light housework and just help you get comfortable with your baby is can be anywhere from $30 to $60 an hour. And other medical systems have it built into their health insurance. And so in Europe, people get midwives and then they get a baby nurse paid for through their healthcare. And here it really has been a high income thing, even though low income people see the best results from having doula care. And Medicaid is actually starting to cover birth doulas. So here in Oregon, OHP, which is our state Medicaid, now covers birth doulas because it improves outcomes so much. And the outcomes for low income and particularly Black women and Indigenous women are much, much worse. And so having a doula with them during their birth improves their outcomes significantly.
Yeah, and can you speak a little bit about why historically and currently still the birth outcomes for Black and Indigenous women in particular are so abysmal?
Well, the long legacy of racism in our country, this is just another one of its tentacles to get
Mhm.
into. And in general, the health and well-being of particularly Black women in this country, birthing people, is bad because of poverty and because of systemic racism and because of the legacies of slavery.
Mhm.
And so when you look at birth, it really reflects all of that racism. So, for example, when a Black woman walks into a hospital, her pain is taken less seriously. her intuition is taken less seriously. There's been a lot of stories of women who, before, during, or after birth, thought, like, we're telling the staff something is wrong, and they were just told that it was fine. I think the famous story is Serena Williams.
Mhm.
During her birth, afterwards, she was telling them that she was having some sort of pain, and they were just saying it was postpartum pain. I think, I don't know if I'm getting this story right, but it turned out she had a really serious life-threatening health condition from the birth, and they barely caught it. So even when Black women are higher income, they
Mhm.
still have worse outcomes than high income white women.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at The Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today. Yeah, that's really disturbing, and certainly it's been more in the news in the last few years, kind of exposing this medical racism, I guess is the right term, and the suffering that can occur, and sometimes even death that can occur, whether it's a birth or another medical outcome that somebody has to undergo for Black and Indigenous women. And I think you've seen some of that in your work. You have practiced as a doula in your past. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, have you seen some of this firsthand?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I've just seen extreme abuse by hospital staff towards all women of all demographics. And this isn't, when I critique hospital staff, it's never towards an individual practitioner, although occasionally it is. Sometimes there's a particularly horrific person that is practicing medicine or is nursing, and they are, just the worst. It mostly is pretty mundane in terms of it's more a systemic issue. And
Okay.
so the care providers in the hospital are really concerned with malpractice. They're really concerned with the system, with shoveling women through their birth. It's sort of like an assembly line. They want to keep the rooms open. They want to keep it going. So that seems to be where their head is. And then they are really worried about really severe bad outcomes. And so they react before there's even an issue.
Say more about that.
Let's say you have a healthy, low risk mom coming in to the hospital to give birth. We know that it can take first timers, anyone who's had a baby or more than one baby. The first birth can be pretty long, and then the second baby can be very fast. So first births especially can take a long time. They can take hours and hours. And sometimes labor stops and it starts and it stalls, and for the mom to rest. And the staff was just never okay with that. If the mom's labor slowed down because maybe her body knew that it needed a break and she needed a nap, they would want to start Pitocin, which is a medication to get contractions going.
Mm-hmm.
If the mom did not want the Pitocin, she was treated really, really poorly by the hospital staff. I remember I had a client who she was 8 centimeters dilated. So she was towards the end of her labor, getting ready to push pretty soon. And she had been 8 centimeters for 3 hours, which is not that long. And she was laying down, she was resting.
Mm-hmm.
And the midwife came into the room and started clapping and saying, "All right, time to get going."
Hmm.
And we were just like, why? Like, is something wrong with her? Something wrong with the baby? Nope. It's just not good for labor to slow down this much.
Hmm.
There was nothing wrong. And so I was like, well, can she get up and walk around the floor and get labor going that way? And that's what we did. We went on a walk, and then her labor started up again, and it was fine. But they keep wanting to do things. They don't want to just let the body do its thing. And I had this Black client once who just the way the staff talked about her, because I could overhear nurses would often talk and they would be at the nurses station and I would hear what they were saying. They thought they were keeping their voices low or something, but they were calling this mom really high maintenance and they were calling her combative. And all I saw her doing, like I'd seen white women speaking up and saying what was on their mind and what they wanted. And they weren't spoken about that way. And I could just see with this, I had a Black client where that happened. And then once I had a Latina client, it was the same thing, that she was being combative and the care providers were all white. And it just seemed really, really racist to me, the way that they were talking about her when I saw white women doing that stuff saying those things in that way all the time.
Right, without those same types of derogatory comments.
Right, exactly.
Do you think in those instances, do you think that altered the kind of care that those women received?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. And unfortunately, the Black mama, her baby ended up dying, which was really horrible. And, it's hard to say what exactly caused it, but it was interesting because then when I went to her home a few weeks later and there were all these women sitting around talking and they'd had babies die just way more. It was way more normalized. And I really think the care was impacted. And also, they just don't have as much access to resources the way that white folks have. A lot of them don't want to get medical care because they're not treated very well. And so not getting that preventative care can really impact the outcomes.
Yeah, it's like this vicious cycle. I think you were talking about the systemic issue. Like you said, yes, there are a handful of people that you could point to who were behaving in a racist way and behaving badly or over interventioning or however we're going to call it, any and all of those things. But really, it's a systemic problem. And it's kind of this positive feedback loop where because of the negative experiences of Native or Latina or Black women in this experience, they don't go get the preventative care, which then exacerbates any problem that they might have, which then leads to potential over intervention, which leads to poorer outcomes, et cetera, right? It's like this horrible positive feedback loop, right?
Absolutely.
So at what point were you like, this is such a problem, and I can see that if there are more doulas for this particular population, or just the population, women in general, that we can improve outcomes. And that's where I, Liz, want to make a difference.
When did that happen?
Yeah.
Well, I had to stop doing doula work because just from going to births from years, I am so traumatized by my time in the hospital and witnessing the way women and birthing folks are treated. My nervous system is totally fried. I couldn't do that anymore. And being at births is amazing and wonderful, but witnessing the abuse on a regular basis, I have a lot of PTSD from it. And so I'm also a childbirth educator. And a couple years ago, the worst of COVID was kind of over. And I was thinking about, what do I want my life's work to be? I just turned 41 and I'm entering this new phase of life in a way, because I feel like I have way more boundaries now. I feel like I speak up a lot for myself now. I feel like I'm less sexualized by men now than I used to be when I was in my 20s and even my 30s. And so there's this new kind of power that comes with that. And so I was teaching childbirth ed, and I also own a perinatal education center where we have childbirth ed, newborn care classes, breastfeeding classes, that sort of thing in Portland. And I on a regular basis saw people wanting doula services, and it wasn't accessible, because OHP covers birth doula services, but it can be challenging to find a birth doula who takes Medicaid. And there's people who don't qualify for Medicaid, but are still super broke who can't afford doula services.
Right.
And then low-income people can't afford postpartum doula services. And I know that a lot of new parents in Portland who have money, I had heard they would love to support other people who couldn't afford doula services, get them. So I thought that would be a really great way to fundraise is through those families. And so I started this organization, and I worked in the nonprofit world in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s. So I was already familiar with nonprofit work. And I decided it would be fun to start a nonprofit and run it the way I thought would most benefit the community and where there was a hole in the community. And there's so few maternal health nonprofits. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of nonprofits in Oregon, and there's 9 that are focused on maternal health. And so I saw a need and a gap for those services, and also not just the direct service, but the research and the policy change to make doula services accessible to everyone. I envision a world where insurance companies have to provide doula services as part of maternity care.
And do you think is that like a pipe dream, or do you think that's realistic?
Oh,
like that
that's
could actually
real.
happen?
That's totally realistic. I think in the next few years, every state or almost every state will have Medicaid coverage for birth doulas. And I think postpartum doulas are coming down the pipeline. It's already happening.
Yeah. I mean, I know for myself, I'm in a fortunate position. We were in a fortunate position where we could, we were like the classic person you're talking about who gets the services, we're white, we're middle income. And I don't think I could have done it without my postpartum doula. I had both a birth doula and a postpartum doula. And I mean, it's surprising to me that anyone can do that without that extra support. Because as much as my partner was supportive, he's in a world that he doesn't know, right? And while he was incredibly supportive, again, he's in a world he doesn't know. And I'm in a world where I don't know either. And the advocacy, the support, the emotional, the physical, all of that support, it was something that profoundly changed my life and the way that I experienced, both my birth and then post. And so it's hard for me to imagine that, that is so far away for so many people, that their experience is so far short of that experience. And I don't know what kind of experience you had with your child, but I imagine that goes into this personal idea of like, wow, my experience is so different from all these other women. And that's fundamentally not fair and wrong. And I want to do something about it. Does that sound about right for you? Is that sort of your experience? Yeah.
Well, and, I did most of my doula work before I had a kid. And so I did all my doula work or most of my doula work. I've been to birth since she's been born. She's 7. And then I had her, and I wanted to write a book called The 1,000 Shitty Things I Said to Moms. Because it's going through it yourself, it's so different. I don't think you need to have had a kid to be a good doula by any means.
Yeah.
But even though I was in that whole world, I was very unprepared for what it meant postpartum. Like I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. And you think you know what it means to not sleep for weeks and weeks until you do it, until you're on week 16 of getting 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
And you're like, you don't feel like yourself. I just felt it was so disorienting. It's sort of like the best and worst thing that's ever happened. So difficult.
Yeah.
It's just like I was flipped inside out, and I had really bad postpartum depression, which wasn't a surprise because I am a depressed, anxious person in general. But I was just really shocked at how much having a baby here, it's so isolating. And I had family around, but I spent the majority of my day in my living room with my daughter. I'd take her on walks and I'd meet up with friends and stuff, but I was just alone most of the time.
Huh.
And with postpartum doula care, it's interesting because, especially for low-income women, there's all these interventions that our government wants to do for them. Like now there's a lot of mental health screening and, there's a lot of birth initiatives passed. But, we had a client who this is her third baby, and we helped her get a postpartum doula. And she was like, this is the first time I could go to therapy because her doctor, her last couple births really wanted her to do therapy. And she's like, I haven't showered for 4 days and I haven't eaten a meal not standing at the sink. And I haven't, slept. And so you want me to sit down in front of a computer, even though it's easy, with my newborn screaming in my arms and talk about how I'm feeling. And so it's sort of like putting someone's oxygen mask on first before they help someone else. And it's like asking people to get a job when they're unhoused. You first have to have basic necessities, housing, warmth, and it's the same
And
postpartum.
And I can really empathize with that. And I think, any parent can, because it's like, what it's like to have that new child, and the fact that you have to do anything that's remotely quote unquote normal, like talk on the phone, is really challenging because your infant needs you or is crying. And like you said, this person hadn't showered in 4 days or whatever it was, or maybe even gone to the bathroom in a while. Those needs become secondary. And that's why, a postpartum doula can be so instrumental, because then that person, tell me how that postpartum doula could help the person who hadn't slept in 4 days and needed therapy.
The particular day this client was talking about, her doula came for 5 hours because I was like, okay, let's do this. Mm-hmm. Your doula is going to come for 5 hours. You're going to spend the first 4 hours eating something while you're seated at the table. Because one thing people don't understand also about having poverty-related trauma is that you can have healthy food, but if your nervous system is so stressed out, you actually won't absorb nutrients. Right. So shoveling food into your mouth, holding a screaming baby, is a way that you will be malnourished, really, because our digestion shuts down when there's stress so that we can run or fight.
Right.
So she ate a meal sitting down without holding her baby. She took a 2-hour nap and she took a shower, and then she did her therapy.
That's amazing.
And she didn't have her baby while she was with her therapist. And she's like, I'm also less depressed and anxious because I have more help.
Right. So yes, good on interacting with the therapist, but maybe as important was being less stressed out, less dysregulated, because she had help from somebody who knew what they were doing and whom she trusted.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And there isn't that, just as an aside, for those people who are fortunate enough to have family members who can help, that's amazing and that's wonderful. But this is different because there's no relationship, there's no tension, there's no baggage that we all carry in our relationships. This is just a professional coming in to support mom and baby.
Yeah, I tell people in my childbirth ed classes, what is your postpartum plan? Who's coming to help you? My mom. How much do you like your mom? I love her, but I don't really like her that much. As much as you don't like her non-postpartum, when you're postpartum, you're going to like her 1,000 times less. So sometimes family members aren't even the best ones to support you postpartum because they're a handful. I hear stories all the time from clients who say, my family came over and expected me to serve them, get that, were asking me for water. And I was 3 days postpartum. They were asking me for drinks and food and stressing me out and giving me advice that I didn't want. And your postpartum doula won't do that. They're just there for you.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a really key point, because even for people who, like I said, are fortunate to have family, that's not always the right solution or the best solution for the mom and the baby in that particular instance, and still incredibly valuable to have help from an impartial person who's there solely to support mom and baby. And for those who are listening and haven't had a child or even known someone who's had a child, I can just vouch for that. That I was like, oh, that would be dreamy to have had, a couple hour nap and a shower and to eat alone and then have a doctor's appointment uninterrupted. That sounds luxurious. And it is, but it shouldn't be. Like that should just be the way things are, right?
Yep.
And I think you mentioned there are other countries where that is the norm, right?
Yeah, I'm going to mess up this word, but in the Netherlands, it's called a kraamverzorgende. It's a maternity nurse.
Okay.
So everyone who gives birth is given through the health, they have socialized medicine there, is given through their health system, a nurse for 2 to 3 weeks after birth, longer if you have a C-section, because you need more help after surgical birth. And that nurse comes, they take care of your other children, they help you with feeding your baby, they do the laundry, they help you eat, they tidy up your home, they help you with your body. After a baby emerges from your body, lots of things are leaking and bleeding and torn open and all the things, and that's just part of their healthcare system. And they go to your home. So you're not getting in a car and going somewhere. And no one checks in on the postpartum person until 6 weeks when they go to their OB visit. And that's crazy. You just had this major thing happen to your body and no one looks at you for 6 weeks. Your baby sees a pediatrician or, a midwife, but no one is looking after your body. I had home birth care and my midwife came like 5 times in the first 2 months to my home to weigh my baby and do all the new baby stuff that you do in those early weeks. And also I was like, can you look at my stitches? And she looked at my stitches and was like, they look fine. Don't look at them, but they look fine to me.
Right.
And she would just lay on my bed and talk to me and I would be sobbing. And
yeah,
that just seems like base level. And even if you don't have kids and you're not planning to have kids and you don't like kids, you don't want to be anywhere near kids. If you're in a society, having healthy families means that you're going to have a better experience. This is why we pay for school, because we want our children to be educated, all the children in our culture. And we should want all of the moms and new parents to be supported so that our society functions better. It just seems baseline. And then when you think of low-income folks and what happens to their children, they're more likely to go in the foster care system. And if you're intervening when that child is 3 with something, it's kind of too late. We should be intervening in pregnancy. That's really when the intervention should start in terms of creating healthier children.
Right, because both the mom and the child in the womb are getting support and then have immediate support upon birth as well. And that just changes the whole trajectory. Like you said, I think you talked about the nervous system, changes the nervous system of the mom, the nervous system of the child, which just changes the whole trajectory of both the mom and the child's lives. Yeah. Right. So even like you said, if you're not a person who has a child or even likes children, you still should care because it impacts your community.
Yep, absolutely.
It sounds like you've had some really good outcomes thus far. You're pretty, this nonprofit is fairly new, but you've still already had some pretty positive outcomes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, every one of our clients that we've given services to has benefited in some way. And there's a lot of dynamics happening, especially in our client population. So sometimes just getting someone a postpartum doula isn't enough to overcome all the other obstacles that they're facing. But like we just had a client, and our other clients will say that this is the best postpartum she had. And this is her 3rd kiddo. And I also think, even though some of our clients might not see the good effects, I can see it. So I know, talking to them before they got their doula versus after they've had their doula for a few weeks, that they sound calmer, they sound better. I can see that. And so the direct service is amazing. And it's where the warm fuzzies come in. I mean, this is, because you have a story, you have a mom and you have a dad, or you have a couple other parents or family members or whatever, and you get to hear how much they love their doula and how great it was and all that. But also, I really want to do community education because a lot of people don't know about our maternity healthcare crisis in this country. And when you vote, we should be pushing through and voting for initiatives that help improve outcomes for everybody. Because the direct service is a little bit of a band-aid. So the problem with nonprofit work is the direct service, and by direct service, I mean us paying directly for people to have birth and postpartum doulas is extremely expensive for an organization to do. And so we're also focused on policy and research because there's quite a bit of data on birth doulas, but there's no data on postpartum doulas at all. I haven't found a really good study on postpartum doula care, even though it's common sense,
Sure.
Yeah, if someone showers and eats and, has someone helping clean their house, like, of course they're going to feel better. But we need to do more research. And so I'm trying to get a research study going right now at OHSU. And I think something's good's gonna happen soon. And then once that research comes out, really with policy, we have so many federal dollars. And so we want to take those federal dollars that we have with the state and put it to supporting our new parents. And so that's where the bulk of people will get helped, is by funneling our resources as a community to help and uplift everybody.
Right. What is that pithy statement about when one boat rises, we all rise, or something like that, right?
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but that's the idea, right? Is okay, if we can all benefit from it when one boat rises. And so it sounds like, your direction is, yeah, direct services, that's amazing. Love it, but it's limited, right? There are limited resources. There are only so many people that you can help. You can't help everyone who deserves and needs the help. And so where you're really seeming to focus your attention, in addition to the direct services, is, okay, we need to do some research, and then we need to do some mega policy shifts. And so what kind of policy shifts would you like to see, assuming, and I'm sure the data will support you in this when it's available, but what do you see as the biggest changes that need to occur?
Well, for Medicaid to cover postpartum doula care, and to make birth and postpartum doula care easy to navigate and accessible. Because right now it's sort of a hot mess. A lot of our clients will come to us because their midwife or doctor or therapist or social worker referred them to us, and they didn't even know they could get a birth doula through their Medicaid plan.
Right.
Like, why don't you know that? You should just know that. Someone should have told you, that should have been offered to you. And so we help people get connected, or they don't know that there are other resources for them. They don't know about lactation consultants, and they don't know, there's just so much resource connection that needs to happen. And we help our clients navigate those resources. And so really having state and federal dollars towards making the system easy to navigate for people, because if you're low income and you have a trauma history that is poverty induced, it is really hard. Like, I'm a white, high income, lady in this country, and it's hard for me to navigate the system. And I'm super resourced, and I'm not struggling to keep a roof over my head and all of that. And so that's one of the huge things, is there are resources and people can't get them.
Yeah, they don't know about them and they can't access them.
Exactly. So that would be a huge policy shift. And just to have all the things that help people in early parenthood, childcare, and really, really good healthcare for the perinatal year. All of that needs to happen. It's starting to happen. There are definitely conversations that are happening right now amongst politicians, amongst our representatives, that they're talking about the perinatal year being really important to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, we in Oregon, it's fairly recent where there's some paid leave now, And that's enormous, although this country is so far behind other countries that have been providing that for, I don't even know how long. And yet there is some hope, is what you're saying, is like, okay, we're moving more in a direction of representatives are talking about it, policy makers are talking about this. And so what could the regular person do to help push this along? You know, if they listen to this podcast and or otherwise move to help ensure that mothers and their infants get the care that they need, whether it's doula care or other care, what's the best way to do that for just the regular person on the street? Money. Okay, money is always the answer. Money.
So, wherever you are, finding the maternal health organizations in your area. And so just Googling, there's not that many. So it's not like you're going to be overloaded. But even just like doing an internet search for maternal health nonprofit and then your city, and then giving money to the nonprofits that seem to be doing good work around perinatal health. And we have some on our website under resources. We always love money at Portland New Family Fund, but there's also a lot of other really great organizations, specifically that uplift the BIPOC community that are here. Yeah.
And like you said, there, somebody's listening from, I don't know, Minneapolis or Grand Rapids, Michigan or something, they can Google the organizations that are in their area so they can have immediate impact in their own communities. Yeah. Are there any national organizations doing really good work, like policy work, that you can recommend that people connect with or get information from?
Specifically about birth doulas, not really, not that I know of, not national. Typically, the doula movement has been hyper-local, and that's reflected in the nonprofits that help support doula work. Like there's an organization called Pregnancy Justice that I really love, and they help moms who've had their babies taken away or who have been incarcerated. That's a national organization. That's really great. But in terms of, there's just not that many. I mean, really, it's, I think just keeping your eye out for, if you see an article, share it, occasionally in the mainstream news, they talk about maternity care. So
occasionally. Occasionally. So like if somebody's listening to this and they're like, gosh, I would love to help, but I don't have any money. What can I do? That's what you're saying is like, okay, great. Understand and love that you're interested in this issue and passionate about this issue. Share articles, maybe talk to your representative, whether that's at the local level. Like even, cities do amazing things sometimes when, more regional governments or state governments, or especially the federal government's very slow to move toward things. Sometimes, not always, but that they can connect with more local representatives to talk about these issues. And sometimes those people have connections on a more impactful level too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And also just be aware of your birthing friends and family. Bring them a meal. Don't go inside, don't bother them, drop a meal off on their doorstep. Even that, even if you don't know what to do for them, food. That's really, the ideal would be for communities to be helping each other and helping ourselves. And so I think just because families and parents are so hidden in the perinatal year. And so just really like tending to your community that's having babies.
Yeah. And I think, it's important. I think a lot of people, I don't want to disturb them. They're new parents. I don't want to bother them. But you're not bothering them when you drop off food at their front door. Right? You're not bothering them when you send a text that just says, hey, I'm thinking of you. I'm here for you. I'm going to bring something by today. And you don't even need to ask. You just do. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love those suggestions. And I love the suggestion of people supporting local organizations such as yours. So to that end, How do they do that? How do people connect with Portland New Family Fund?
So we're at portlandnewfamilyfund.org, and our email is info@portlandnewfamilyfund.org. And we're always also looking for volunteers. So
Mm-hmm.
have time. You don't even have to live in Portland. We are happy to put you to work doing a whole array of things. Sometimes people have special skills. That's really helpful. And sometimes there's just boring, mundane tasks. Sometimes people will be like, God, it must be so fulfilling, like running a nonprofit organization. And I just say, working for a nonprofit organization is a series of boring administrative tasks 98% of the time. Then 2% of the time, it's like your client, one of our clients sobbing on the phone and being so grateful for their doula. And then that's kind of the warm fuzzies, or having like great conversations in the community. That's the fun stuff. But nonprofits are corporations. We just don't pay income tax. We pay other taxes. We're not a tax-free, but we're a corporation. And so volunteering is always really helpful.
Yeah, a corporation that doesn't make any money, mostly. There's the difference. And I forgot to mention, and I think, I don't want to end this conversation without saying, like, one of the things that we did sort of brush on is that you're giving equitable compensation to these doulas. So I think you mentioned that Medicaid doesn't necessarily pay very well. It's great that it's covering some of the doula work, but it doesn't necessarily pay very well. And you're providing equitable compensation to doulas so that they can do work that is, I'm not saying it's any, less meaningful for them to provide doula work to other clients, but here's a real opportunity to serve clients that they might not otherwise have the opportunity to do. And that has to be, and I'm sure you've heard, pretty fulfilling for the doulas that you've been able to work with.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of barriers when you're, with OHP getting reimbursed as a doula. It's modular payment, which means if your client does not call you into the birth, which happens, sometimes people's phone dies, they can't afford to pay it, and so they don't have a way to contact you. Or, sometimes people, when they get free services, they don't utilize them, and so then out $650 of your $1,500, and you were really relying on that for monthly income. A lot of doulas are low income.
Yeah.
Even charging top dollar, they're low income. And so we pay doulas directly. We pay them no matter what. So if they're relying on the money, they get it, which is how it works in the for-profit doula world, is that people pay you, and whether or not you go to their birth, as long as it's not your fault, you get paid anyways. And so trying to reproduce that model for...
Yeah. And again, I know we were kind of closing in on our conversation, but I didn't want to go without emphasizing that you are providing a service, not just for the client, but for the doula.
Yep.
And how really important that is, because I don't think people realize that on Medicaid, if something happens, you don't get paid the full amount, which is not how it works in the for-profit world at all. You are paid ahead of time, and you're paid whether or not they want you there in the end. So,
And a birth doula will take, full-time is like 3 clients a month. So if you're making $1,500 a birth, which is a pretty like middle rate, you're only making about $45,000, $50,000 a year. Like that's in a lot of cities, poverty line wages, especially if you're a single parent, you have kids, you're not making a ton of money as a doula typically.
And to be clear, and a lot of people don't realize this, that if you're doing 3 births, it's not like, oh, that's only, 40 hours worth of work for the month. No, it's a massive amount of work, and it varies depending on the person, right? Depending on what their needs might be. So in other words, it's not like you're getting paid hundreds of dollars an hour. That's not how this is working out.
Nope. And often you're on call. And what does it mean to be on call? It means you go to a movie, you might have to leave halfway through the movie. It means you're at the beck and call of your client, because their birth can happen whenever. And so it's really hard to plan your life. It's really hard to settle your system, because you could be called in at any time. And so it's a state of hyperarousal often for a lot of people.
Yeah. And like you said, the fact that somebody goes into labor at 3:00 in the morning, that's when their body decided that it was time. And that also means that you show up and you're there for the birth.
Yeah, I mean, I really think doulas, and this is not the case, but a birth doula should really be paid about between $4,000 and $5,000 in today's
Mhm.
economy to make like a comfortable wage.
Mhm. Mhm.
For most big cities, it's different in rural areas, of course.
Sure, sure. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I didn't want to leave without
Yeah.
saying that piece that this is really good. I mean, I think to round this out, what I'm hearing from this conversation and then just from my own knowledge is that this is good for obviously for the mom, for the infant, and ultimately for the community, also for the doula. I mean, it's like this ripple effect
Mhm.
that is not necessarily obvious to those who wouldn't otherwise know. And so getting the word out about how important this work is and why this care is fundamental. Like you said, this is baseline. This is fundamental. This isn't a luxury. This isn't anything that, just a high income anybody should get. It should be something that is accessible for all women.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so say again where we can find you. So we'll have that at the end so people can find it easily, and I'll put it on the show notes as well.
PortlandNewFamilyFund.org, and our email is info@portlandnewfamilyfund.org.
You also have Instagram, if I remember correctly.
We do have Instagram, yes. If you go on our website, we have all our social media links at the top.
That's fantastic. Well, before I end, I always do try to ask, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get to talk about that I didn't get to ask you about that we should
Oh
talk
my
about?
God, 1,000 things. I mean, I love talking about the history of obstetrics in the US.
Yeah.
There's a really great documentary called Business of Being Born, and it's by Ricky Lake. Like Ricky Lake made it. It's amazing.
Really?
Fabulous. Yeah. Watch that. Watch that
Watch
movie.
that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. And maybe in another year, you'll come back on the show and we'll be able to talk about all the research that has been done and the policies and changes that have passed. That would be
Yeah,
phenomenal.
that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Manifest it. I'll manifest it.
You work on that. In the meantime, I know that you're going to be working on growing your nonprofit, and I wish you the best with that because I know it's such a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody, it's Melissa, and I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities, or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations? It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.